So I would say that encouraging them to think in a 360 way.
Okay.
And the 360 is both, horizontally and vertically, if you will,
Yeah.
because that provides additional perspective and additional inputs and insights that will often fall in the blind spots,
Hmm.
which at the end of the day, it's all about, addressing your blind spots and using that as kind of a propelling mechanism for your career.
All right. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Ashim Bose to the podcast and get his thoughts from a very rich experience on this pertinent topic today. Welcome to the studio, Dr. Ashim.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Great to be here.
Yes, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that you made the time for this, and I'm really excited to hear your thoughts. So let's just dive in. That's how we like to do it. And with yourself, I want to share you've had a fascinating career arc, really, from delivering in the industry, from giant multinationals to small startups, everything in between. And now you've made this cut over to education to help lead the next generation, I should say. Multiple generations are active. So just to get us started, what prompted your move into education? And has anything been really surprising about the transition to you?
So, great question. I get asked that a lot.
Fair.
So, yeah, as you said, 35 plus years in industry, different roles. Had a PhD back in the day in AI, of all things.
Oh,
It's
cool.
more of a
Yep.
research topic back then, but
Right.
it's good to see a lot of that research turn into reality as we see
Mm-hmm.
around us, right? So, when I moved into when I say real, I'm in the commercial world. The goal was always to kind of come back into academia at some point
Mm.
and pursue, research, some teaching, give back to the next generation. And, after 35 years in industry, I, could have continued on that path and more of the same, right? Different roles, different companies. But at the end of the day, if you're in a commercial company, you're after revenue, you're after profits, you're after growth, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to try something different, and the timing just turned out to be right. And got a great opportunity at the University of Texas at Dallas to become a full time faculty, and everything just kind of fell into place. And I still very much keep up with industry. I do some consulting with some of my prior connections. I also I'm an expert panelist, that type of thing. So lots of guest speaking and that type of thing. So it's a good mix of lots of different things. But last but not least, it's the students that keep me on my toes, right?
Yes.
It's a very wide variety of students. I'm in the School of Management, so some are more technical, some are not. It covers the gamut. And, being exposed to those, that type of thinking, that type of originality, the energy, the passion, the curiosity that keeps me on my toes and keeps me going, keeps me motivated as well. So it's been an awesome transition.
Nice. I can totally understand that. I mean, I think like I said, changes things up, I'm sure, from corporate, and this opportunity to give back deeply resonates. So I can totally understand. I definitely want to pick at a few things you said already to kind of dive for a deeper dive. But I thought to start actually a little bit. I know that you about any keeping on topic with the generations that you're working with. What are some of the differences you're seeing? Because I know you're passionate about highlighting that. What are some of the differences and maybe biggest mindset shifts you've seen um, that are required in leadership to work with today's emerging talent?
Yeah, so great question. I think,
Yeah.
in terms of today's talent, from what I've seen, they're definitely very goal oriented.
Mm.
They have a, focus on time to value, which is, much shorter than back in the day when I was in their shoes, if you will. It was more of a journey back then. And, it took you wherever, the path you were on, etc. But now it's much more goal oriented, much more, I would say time to value, as well as, there is some, skepticism as well, right? About what what they've been told and what the world around them looks like and so on.
Hmm.
So some of the reality of, some of the things that they're dealing with in terms of the economy, in terms of the impact of AI, in terms of weather changes and so on. So it covers the gamut, and there is some skepticism, but also a desire to make an impact, to make a change and make
Hmm.
it quickly, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot
Like
a lot
every,
of the students that I talk to are, wannabe entrepreneurs, CEOs, and they're looking for the shortest path to get there, whether to start their own companies or progress within the corporate world at a much faster pace than perhaps, some of us did, but that's definitely something I see.
yeah, that's cool. I mean, it checks out. Everything is faster these days, right? So the expectations of the next generation, it makes sense that they're in there as well. Um, okay, awesome. Let's keep that in mind as we go through some of these other questions, because I would love to keep highlighting some of these things because they're very pertinent, I think, to success in today's world. But I really want to deep dive into a little bit talking to you about building leadership with technical talent. And I know this is something I've been really passionate and outspoken about also as a having started as a young engineer way back in the day, knowing how I made my path up into management and leadership, but then also seeing how many others have struggled and different and then really exploring some different root causes of that. So I just wonder, can you share with us your thoughts on really how to nurture high performing technical talent, be it in the leadership thing, technical leadership, or cutting over to kind of business leadership um, uh, paths, and just what are your thoughts on that? How does the individual succeed, and what's the role organizations play in helping with those with that success?
Yeah, that's been one for the ages, right? I
Yes,
mean,
for sure.
historically, it's been the most talented, the best talent technically that gets elevated. The assumption is they're going to learn and scale and make an impact, and that doesn't always turn out to be true.
Mhm.
You know, just because you're a strong individual contributor doesn't mean you're going to naturally step into leadership and make the
Agreed.
desired impact, if you will.
Yeah.
So some of the transitions that, just thinking from my experience that I had to make, which I've also kind of, baked into my day to day leadership when I was in the corporate
Hmm.
world is, first of all, it's, you may be the smartest person in the room when you're an individual contributor.
Yeah.
But once you start getting into leadership, then it's not desirable that you be the smartest person in the room. You want to
That's a good way
build
of
a
putting it.
team that's smarter than you that
Yeah.
can help you and get you to where you need to get to. So that level of humility is something that takes a while to kind of internalize, if you will.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the ego gets in the way and and so on, so you got to deal with those types of issues as well. Communication is another one, right? As an individual contributor, you may be in a meeting with your colleagues and bosses and so on and bored out of your mind because a lot of what they're talking about is things you already know about, and you might even consider it to be a waste of your time to be in these meetings and so on, which as an individual contributor, you definitely want to chime in and contribute, but not everybody does. And it's okay as long as you're doing really good work and writing good code or whatever it is that your, day job is,
Hmm.
if you will. But, as you aspire to, leadership and progression in your career, communication becomes key. It's no longer about the work you're doing. It's more about the work everybody else around you is doing and how you can scale it, make an impact in terms of trajectory, velocity, acceleration, all of those things come in. And that's where,
Hmm.
that's how you become a good leader, a strong leader, if you will, is by motivating, communicating, being positive about it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are all things that start to kick in. And then, you know, collaboration, as you're going up the ladder, you're going to be working with other functions, whether it's sales, marketing,
Yeah.
product, HR, legal, etc., finance. And you got to make best friends in some of these other business
Yeah.
units to get the work done because that's how you make an impact right
Yeah.
across the company, if you will. So, as I was, one of my early lessons learned was, make the finance person your best friend because At the end of the day, in the corporate world, it's the business impact you make, and the business impact is measured through finance, right? Revenue, profit, utilization, all of those metrics come in. And so, and finance I've found is one of the most honest, spokesperson for the state of your business. They'll tell it like it is. And it's worth listening to. Similarly with some of the other functions too. If your product's not selling, your sales will tell you it's not selling and you got to do something about it and so on. But having that open level of communication, collaboration, trust helps as you aspire and grow in your leadership potential.
Yeah, that makes them I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me for sure. It's really ultimately recognizing that what gets you success as a individual contributor is not the key to success at the next levels. Even as a team lead, then going beyond manager and up like that. Do you find that there is a and you've listed some very important ones, of course, like the you have to go beyond your technical skills, right?
Mhm.
Communication, engagement, understanding the value chain, what everybody plays in the organization is not something that comes through a technical education, right? Like, and the focus and the successes, your own superpower in getting you to rise there is just not gonna is not only needed, need more. What do you think is the role? Like, do you think there's a role an organization needs to play in closing some of these gaps? And yeah, and or is it really up to the individual to figure this out?
I think it's a little both. I think the
Yeah.
organization does have to play a role. I remember, in my early leadership opportunities, some of these workshops and our scenario role playing, etc., that I was exposed to, that definitely helped in terms of opening my eyes.
Yeah.
Figuring out the blind spots. Everybody has blind spots, but the sooner you're aware of them, you figure it out, the better off you are in addressing those gaps, if you will. So the organization absolutely has a role to play. Of course, there's a lot of content out there, including, podcasts, etc., that you can also listen to, and a lot of people do. But getting a impartial kind of third perspective through these workshops, seminars, etc., that can be extremely, extremely eye-opening as well.
Yeah, agreed. What are some of the, because you've lived this many times over, right? And I really appreciate that, practical and experience perspective. Is there any kind of early signs that you look for when a technical leader might be struggling in their new role or needs more support to get on the path to success? Just
Yeah.
looking for, yeah, yeah, just to support your experience, So anybody listening, they might just be like, oh yeah, it doesn't always look like what we might think it looks like, right? So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm gonna use an example as I talk about this because there's definitely one that comes to mind. So I had this really brilliant individual contributor who,
Mhm,
had a lot of potential, and but he would speak up in meetings in a very kind of not a positive way, if you will. He got over time he earned a reputation for being Mr. Doomsday, if you will, always looking at the negative and critiquing others and so on. And so I had a one-on-one with him and talked about not all the wonderful things that he was contributing to,
mhm,
but also pointed out some of the feedback I was getting. And then, I asked him why, from his perspective, why that was happening.
mhm,
And it was really interesting because, there was complete silence for a while. I don't think he'd ever been asked that before. People in general, a lot of managers will kind of gloss over some of the bad stuff and just say, yay, and then on to, the next year
mm,
and just kind of keep repeating the same mistakes. After a while, he said, "You know what? I may have done some things to deserve the feedback I'm getting." And he really, I thought, I wasn't sure how this conversation was going to go given his reputation, but he took it really well and he surprised me. And he took the feedback, and then he and I worked on a week to week basis where we would, I'd give him direct feedback on how he did the last week on the meetings that I was in on with him and so on. And
mhm,
you could see a marked change and a difference, over the next few months. And then he became one of the strongest
mm,
contributors as a leader, got promoted, a lot of good things have happened to him. And it was really good to see because the path he was on was not going to get him there, but these minor tweaks and the reflection that was encouraged definitely helped him get there. So, what I would say to managers is don't be shy. Don't be afraid to not give people the direct feedback that they
Hmm.
need. Feedback is a gift. It's a gift that we all need to take and give in a nice way, in a positive way. But it can make huge difference in people's careers and the impact they have on the business.
Yeah. I agree. And I love that that's, reflection, and the reflection is part of your answer, and then helping, and then this direct intervention to help is so helpful. But if you think beyond these reactive interventions after the fact, right? When kind of, it feels a lot of times, and I don't like we could throw somebody in the water to sink or swim, and then we're helping them as need be, right? Have you seen some proactive, preventative strategies that work, right? To really recognize that this is going to be a cutover switch is needed, right? Like you kind of talked about it earlier on. Kind of have to go from this is success now. This is what success looks like. How do we help somebody before we like throw them in the deep end, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. In some of the companies I've been at, some of the early leaders, they get put in a room with some of the more seasoned leaders, workshops, seminars, on a regular basis, peer reviews, coaching, mentoring, all of those things help. Getting paired up with somebody that's more of a senior leader and we meeting with them periodically, asking questions, being challenged, being motivated, etc. Those are all things that I've seen that are more proactive, if you will,
Mhm.
and also a bit of a lifeline, right? So
Yes.
that encourages, the person to not feel like they're alone, if you will. So that support system helps as well.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Um, so I want to ask you a little bit about role AI plays in some of these development of technical talent in this way. I'm honored to, I really am looking forward to your input because nowadays, of course, there's many AI experts. But as you kind of introduced yourself, you've been at this for way longer than it was the hot topic of the moment. So I would really look forward to getting your thoughts on, how can we use AI to develop and retain technical talent, and what's your work in that area or thoughts on that area?
Yeah. So, with generative AI and all the progress therein, I would say that I definitely can play a role.
Yeah.
And it's going to be up to the company and how they want to use the AI,
Uh-huh.
etc. But when it comes to the coaching, the mentoring, the real time insights, meeting summaries, sentiment analysis on conversations,
Mm,
meetings, etc. Those are tools. They can be worth gold if they're
mhm,
used properly. Now there
mhm.
is always the risk of not being used properly, which leads
Yes.
to being able to manage that risk and make sure the organization is completely aligned in terms of governance and privacy and security and some of those other topics that would also be important here. But all of the stuff I was talking about earlier, the
Yeah.
workshops, the mentoring, the coaching, the lifeline, you know AI can do that, right? AI can do that in real time if used well. And you know one has to take this with a grain of salt, and there may be still human in the loop, human reviews and so on needed, so that's not going away. But some
Mhm.
of the raw, collecting the data, analyzing it, and then kind of summarizing some of the key takeaways, etc., those are things that AI tools can definitely help with. And so
Yeah. So we can
I
use,
really think that this area is going to be hugely impacted with AI.
yeah, I agree. So really you're ultimately saying AI, we can use it to scale and get more effectiveness out of we know is working, which is one of these, like there's personalization needed to close people's individual gaps, and we can use AI to get there faster and probably scale more, right? Because one of the challenges inherently with a lot of the working session, the lists that you have mentioned is it gets harder at scale. Building one leader, we all kind of know what that looks like, what it takes, and it, of course, depends on context and that person. But really doing it at scale is where we have been challenged over or in the historically. So AI can help us in that way.
Yeah, definitely scale, also velocity,
Velocity. Yeah.
you no longer need to wait for the next
Yeah.
peer review in a month or,
Fair. Yeah.
it's all real time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, just the real-time nature of it can also allow you to be more adaptive, right? So you're kinda reacting and adjusting at a much faster rate, if you will.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I love your point. There still needs humans inside, inside the
Yeah.
highway. Even as a technologist myself, I'm always highlighting this this things first. It's a tool. I like for scaling, going faster, being more personalized, but you still need humans in there. Just like I always like to throw in that human side. I like to also let's go to data, and you already mentioned also need to be using it properly. But to me, it's always like garbage in, garbage out, right? Like you can be amplifying the wrong thing if it's being misused. But even stepping back, following that link to data, is there some key metrics or measurements that you have uncovered or have been used or seen used in the past that are really helpful to this conversation to understand what are we doing and how is it helping us ultimately?
In terms of the AI or
I think actually
the
just general, as I was referring, I think it's more general data because I don't think it's AI specific. If anything, I mean, I would say just from this line of thinking, AI is getting us get the data faster and interpret it better. But really, what is it that we're measuring is outside of the AI question.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of the metrics, obviously, so I'll start with, performance review type metrics and then kind of work our way down
Perfect. Yeah,
from
yeah,
there,
please.
right? So in terms of the performance review metrics, there's typically some measure of sentiment, right? So, it could be customer sentiment, it could be, stakeholder sentiment, feedback, etc. So that's one of the metrics that
Mhm.
comes to mind. Another one that comes to mind is just the business impact, right?
Yes.
And depending on the role, it could be, revenue, profit,
Mhm.
customer satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And and then of course, your team feedback, which is a little bit different from customer and stakeholder feedback.
Mhm.
How does your team, as a leader, it's important for them to have a voice in, how you're doing and how you're performing and so on. So those are some of the metrics that come to mind, depending on, again, as you go up the chain, your scope increases, your influence increases, and then you are also impacting other functions, marketing, engineering, product, sales, etc. And so there could be metrics to measure some of that impact as well, either through the metrics they measure to
Mhm.
improve their performance or through some, touch points, if you will. So, and that's where it gets really interesting. But those are some of the metrics that come to mind. In
Yeah.
terms of the day to day, did
No,
you
no, no.
want to?
Please go ahead. No, no,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. In terms of the day to day, it's obviously important to, have a pretty close handle on, just the pulse of the business, if you will. And, typically it's done through some sort of a real time ish scorecard. How many defects in the last release? How many defects in the last sprint? What was the performance, to plan in the last sprint? So these are all things that, start kicking in as operational metrics, day to day, week to week, etc., depending on the role, right? And it's important to have an eye on those as well, because at the end of the day, those add up and start influencing some of the other performance review type metrics as well.
Yeah, I find your answer very interesting because it gives a bit of a framework, I would say, to organizations because you have to look at this kind of, performance, business impact, and then team feedback, keeping in day-to-day indicators in mind. But then really the magic happens, I guess, is if you apply this to your organization, right? So what does it look like in your organization? What does performance mean, right? What is the impact, business impact we're driving? And then, exactly to your point, applying the team feedback appropriately to your level and your role to get the full picture.
Agree.
So, and which brings me another question, which is one of the key themes that's definitely emerging here is that these things look they're the same across industries, teams, functions, which is so interesting because industries obviously there's so many different variations of it in context when you apply the industry, organizational, team context, but the principles are always the same. Do you agree with that with that kind of view?
I would say so. And,
Yeah,
given the many industries that I've been in,
right.
what I would say is some of these, fundamentals don't change.
Yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, every industry, has some unique aspects to it. I'm not discounting that, but some of the fundamentals in terms of performance, leadership, KPIs, etc., those I've not seen vast amounts of change from industry to industry, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that fascinating to think about how, because to me, it's a bit of a clue to solving some of those gaps in the front. Because if some of these fundamentals are the same and they're needed everywhere and we're not doing them well, that to me is kind of a clue to closing that gap and not having to be really org or industry specific to help with some of these fundamentals. So that I just find that interesting to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically it falls in within the kind of the HR function when it comes to
Yeah.
organizational and people type things. And in some companies, that gets a lot more weight than other companies.
Yes.
And you can over time you can see the difference in terms of culture and reputation,
Yeah, what do you
employee
think about that?
satisfaction, and so
I
on.
find it fascinating. That's so interesting that you brought this up. And absolutely, it lives in HR. I've been a tech leader, transformation leader, have partnered with HR in my corporate career. But now that I'm looking at this a bit holistically, right? Like, so say you're a technical leader in a company who's in charge of delivering the product, and you have to the product using your people, process, technology concept. It's not just people always. There's this like multi-dimensional view of what it takes to really build a capability, right, for delivery. It is often just, punted over to HR. And I say that like, so I wonder, like, how do you see that relationship? Like, how is HR, who's a people focused function, really set up to build the leaders of the future that as a technical leader, you might need to be working with, to keep delivering in this, ultimately high demand space we are all living in right now. I just wonder how you think about that split and, what could be helpful in organizations when they're, really building this out.
Yeah, that's a great question. So,
Hmm.
and to clarify, I didn't mean to say it should just sit in HR. I think
Hmm.
it's a joint responsibility.
Yeah.
In terms of ownership, a lot of times it does, but doesn't
Hmm.
mean that others are not responsible or
Yeah.
co-owners, if you will. What you don't want large organizations doing is kind of reinventing the same thing in every department, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's
Yeah.
this framework, standard processes, etc. Then why not just roll it out, once, and then have these departments kind of tweak things based on their needs, if you will.
Their needs. Yeah.
So I fully am 100%, in agreement in terms of joint ownership between the business function and, the organizational leadership function, which often is in HR.
Hmm.
One of the best practices I've seen is leveraging what I call HR business partners. So these
Hmm.
are people who sit within HR, but who are embedded within the business and the way the business operates on a day-to-day basis. And so they become kind of the coach, mentor, advisor,
Yeah.
consultant for a lot of these aspects, but within the line of business, if you will. And
Yeah.
they also then are able to bring in the best practices, from the
Yes.
mothership, which is the HR organization, if you will. So that works well if
Hmm.
done right. And sometimes what happens though is, in the day-to-day firefighting and crisis management and so on, that some of those bigger, more strategic goals get forgotten. Things get really tactical. And when that happens, sometimes that intent of why this was set up this way gets lost, if you will, because, people just don't have the time or the bandwidth to thinking about those things because they're doing the day-to-day firefighting.
Yes. That's a really great. So I love that. I mean, I also 100% agreement on the joint ownership. I love that. And your HR business partner being embedded that's a really great example of a solution, right? To kind of to help bring in the practices, but make them specific to that team, and they can really understand the daily operations, including the good and the I like to say the good and the bad and the ugly, right? To really be helping to drive meaningful progress in the right direction. Yeah, that's interesting. But you're right. I bet that's a loaded one. That say done right. There's probably so many happy paths and not so happy paths to consider on that journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I know sometimes I hear from leaders, and this goes back a little bit to where we started with the generational differences. I've been hearing from leaders, sometimes frustrations with the multi-generation or the challenges with the multi-generation. And of course, there's others who bring the opportunity, always comes with opportunities as well. That's like, two sides of the same coin in my thoughts process. You're in a bit of a unique position, right? Having lived a corporate journey and then now really preparing the students for it. Considering, what you're seeing in the classrooms, like, can you give us, hope or, like optimism for the next generation of leaders? Yes, they are different. They're thinking differently. They're coming at things not exactly the same way we have. But what gives you hope that corporate world and business is in good hands going forward?
So yeah, there are definitely differences, but I would say that in terms of it's more velocity, right?
Yep.
Everybody's kind of moving much faster. There's also an attention span difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kids with the devices, the phones, the
Yep.
iPads, etc. Just the access to information and the speed at which they do their research and make decisions is very, very different, right? We're now seeing the first kind of AI native generation kind of
Yep.
growing up,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
ChatGPT and some of these other AI tools are just part of their, repertoire, if you will,
Yep. Of
just as Google was, back in the day, right? A few
course.
years ago for some of us. And so we're seeing some of those changes, some of those differences. It's not good or bad. I mean, the companies are going to need to adapt and adjust. Part of the challenge here is that a lot of the companies are still kind of stuck in the old way of doing things, right?
Yes. Yeah. Fair. Yeah.
And here we have the workforce now being populated by people who want to do things a little bit differently.
Yes.
And so there has to be some give and take in this. It's not just, hey, you're going to adapt to us, or the other way around. It's got to be some meeting in the middle, but also finding ways to kind of motivate the incoming talent, so they see light at the end of the tunnel. They see an opportunity to make an impact within some of these other more traditional organizations, if you will.
Yeah, that's an encouraging. I like that, having raising awareness for companies to start looking at things differently. I'm like a mother of young, up and coming students. And it's like, to me, I could also be very frustrated with the school it's easy to be frustrated with being like, oh, measuring how they're progressing through school through my lens of what success was when I was doing that, decades ago now, right? But I also at the forefront is the fact that I ask my 12-year-old to help me with my, AI little videos or something I'm doing because they're just, so to me, it's like that's such a duality. And I keep myself always reminded of that when I'm jumping and being frustrated with the new ways. Obviously, it's just so different, right? Nothing is good or bad. It's just different. And it's like stepping into that space with awareness is probably a game changer for many people and then ultimately companies, right? To take advantage to succeed in this new world today.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mhm.
the other aspect of that is these companies, at the end of the day, they have customers too, right?
Right.
And these customers are changing as the generation, moves
Yeah.
from one to the next. And
Right.
so, making sure you understand your customer, which is kind of one of the biggest fundamentals of business, if you will. So you can actually leverage some of these incoming talent to fast track that process
Yeah.
with the
How
generation change.
do you see absolutely. Do you see a difference? So I like the ones you mentioned about velocity, moving faster, different tools, and different goal orientation. Do you see a difference also in how the next generation is valuing like work life integration and some of those differences between and I say this in a very general statement how our generations were get doing all the things, and professional success was a lot of times put in ahead of some personal successes. And there's a bit of, do you see the difference how the new generation is viewing that and approaching it?
I do. There's definitely more focus on velocity, but the work life difference or the balance, I'm not seeing that as much. I'll be honest. It's more, it's a lot more goal orientation, but there's also, conversations as I walk the hallways at school. Sometimes it's like, hey, I just want to retire when I'm 45 or 50 and then enjoy life. So
Right.
that whole work-life balance discussion has changed to the point where, I'm gonna do whatever it takes for the first 20 years, and then I'm gonna, do
Okay.
something different.
So
And it may be
faster. Yeah.
because of, we have a few, very, very successful tech billionaires out there that are,
Right.
being an inspiration to some of these folks, right?
Yeah.
So I'm
Glorifying the
definitely seeing
path,
more of that.
the path.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I guess then to your point, like very strong goals and accelerated expectations
yeah,
for getting there, right? It's like seems like it's coming through.
exactly.
So yeah, to wrap things up, I always love to give my guests a magic wand. So to think, if you were looking forward and speaking to leaders in organizations today who might not be, who are probably worried, looking down and figuring things out. They're busy, 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 right, in their organization. If you could give them one leadership capability, to really help them separate high performing sorry, help them develop their high performing tech talent so that they can, help them scale that internally into organizational success. What would you use, your powers on?
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. Prioritization right back at you.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say that, encouraging them to think in a 360 way,
Okay.
and the 360 is both, horizontally and vertically, if you will,
Yeah.
because that provides additional perspective and additional inputs and insights that will often fall in the blind spots,
Hmm.
which at the end of the day, it's all about, addressing your blind spots and using that as kind of a propelling mechanism for your career. So that'd be my magic
Like,
wand.
I think that's a great use of that, because I feel like, again, in that 360 view, you can bake in a lot. Like, what does your team look like? How do you work within the organization, right? And then how does the growth look like, beyond just getting this thing done? So I feel like, really encouraging that holistic view, it would be a very powerful use. I like that. Is there anything else that you would like to highlight just for anybody listening today that we didn't get to touch on?
I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too.
Things are changing for sure.
Mhm.
Things are not static 'cause it's highly dynamic at the moment, especially with the AI and its impact coming in. And it is definitely gonna, encourage us all to kind of be on our toes and
Yes.
adapt and grow fast, if you will. But I'm very optimistic about what the future holds.
Yes. Well, I love to, and that's a great optimistic note to end on. Thank you very much, Dr. Asim Bose, for your time today and sharing your valuable insights.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.